Epilogue. The vacation was taken at my mother's and father's insistence. As a break from my caregiving responsibilities, I went down to Lake Puyehu, a lake in the Andes, just east of Osorno, Chile. I stayed at an inn on the south side of the lake. Looking across the water, I had a breathtaking view of a huge volcano. I took a few sheets of paper from my bag, and little by little over the next few days, wrote down an outline of what I would teach when I returned to Santiago. While I was at Lake Puyehu, I told the story of my encounter with Jesus to another tourist at the inn. The woman was a charismatic Catholic, and she took me to a mass of people speaking in tongues. This mass invoked for me the trance-like situation I had experienced during my trip in Israel when I was wearing the robes and I felt that I had lived 2,000 years ago. I could see the synthesis of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in the same room, and also the other spiritual traditions that pointed to this radical unity and of the process of life and death. It was giving birth to a new cycle. Death was a part of life, and life was a part of death, though our culture had forgotten that, remembering the bardo process of the Tibetans. The program I devised at Lake Puyehu and gave for a group of 18 the weekend after coming back became the basis for teachings and workshops I shared with tens of thousands all over the world during the next 7 years. The healing process I engaged in with my mother allowed her to live another 7 years. Love was the most fundamental quality in her healing. It was genuine love, given of my own free will, and not something that could be taken for granted. It was not assigned as a task, because like learning, it is boring and insignificant if one is forced to love. Loving has to be chosen deliberately. The possibility of choosing to love is what makes our free will worth the risk. When we use our freedom properly and choose to love, then love becomes tremendously meaningful. When it comes from our deepest essence, the source of all our freedom, then we can feel true love. This love was similar to the love therapy I awakened to in my first years as a physician. There is a physiology of love. It is not just an emotional experience, but a whole soul experience. Love is the golden thread that unites all the forms of healing. This can be a very abstract concept, so we need to see it in a very practical way. It is really affection, expression, and helping people to get back on the path of their own lives. Each of us seems to be born with a blueprint that turns us into a specific person: intellectual, spiritual, psychological. When we have the opportunity to serve those with illnesses, we allow them to care for themselves once again. The inner resources of love are awakened when you facilitate them to live their own message, and when you tell them the inspiration of other courageous patients. The therapeutic process becomes very important when patients realize that they're mortal. The awareness brings with it the desire to make the most out of life in the present moment, to reconnect it with the original now meditation and experience the completeness of life at each particular stage. Serving my mother in those years allowed me the privilege of integrating my spiritual learning into the healing process. The healing that took place was empowerment, not overpowering the illness, but empowering the soul. I gave my power away freely in order to bring my mother back from cancer. And in the process, she was able to bring forth her own soul awareness and was educated by the self-knowledge of her soul. Wholeness or health is our natural state. The nature of my mother's healing involved moving the obstructions that psychologically or spiritually reduced this natural state, allowing her to come back into her world. The life force came back, and the whole system of life allowed her to live these last years with an improved quality of living that was guided by self-discovery and the recovery of the sacredness in her own life. Thus, illness in her case, and death in the case of Maria's mother, was an opportunity for healing. These events took place many years back on the spiritual path I have followed. I call it a path and not a career, because it is not leading to any goal I have placed at the end, but wandering where it will and presenting many wonderful and beautiful surprises along the way. The opportunity to heal my mother depended more on the quality of the relationship than on the time spent or the technique. This transformed the process from curing to healing. From the joining of hearts and minds comes the realization that both son and mother, doctor and patient, are one in our suffering. When embracing the essence of this relationship, both healer and patient explore the depths of their experiences and their resources. It is through this unity that both can be healed. A positive, dedicated, life-affirming attitude is the key to the healing process. A healing attitude, therefore, is not superficial. It involves, physician, heal thyself. A deep inner knowledge that we're not victims of the world, nor of karma, nor circumstances. We have the authority to respond to adversity any way we choose. By taking responsibility for our source, for our health, and for our entire life, we gain a mastery in any circumstance. Healing goes far beyond the confines of the physical body. It occurs as we tap into our own inner resources instead of looking for external intervention. Meditation and a quiet mind, prayer and a hopeful mind. These change human physiology. With intention, attention, and practice, we can learn to control our minds. With this control, we can find the deepest kind of healing, which is victory over suffering. By opening the intuitive heart to soul awareness, humankind can recover the sacred and go beyond the search for the meaning of disease or healing to the search for meaning and purpose in life. My life has already gone on for many years since the events described in this book, and I have experienced further developments on the path to soul awareness. Because of this, and to prevent you, the reader, from being left with an incomplete feeling of resolution, I will fill in what happened to the various characters in this book as time passed. For several years after she moved back to Europe, I didn't have much contact with Françoise, the woman who started me on my quest for greater soul awareness. After 12 years, I was in Santiago, Chile again, and a telephone book fell off a table near me. Remembering Clarice's advice about such circumstances, I stepped back and observed. The book fell open to a page on which I noticed the name of one of Françoise's cousins who was still living in town. I gave her a call, and she told me that Françoise had divorced and remarried and moved to New York City. When I was in New York for a conference about 7 months later, I looked her up and met with her, and we have kept in close contact as friends for many years since then. I did not encounter Don Eduardo again. After he gave me the referral to the Machi that helped me care for my mother, I heard he had moved to the rainforests of Brazil to work with native peoples who used ayahuasca in their visionary rituals. He seemed quite contented to serve as initiator of new spiritual seekers from then on, and did not continue his own studies. In 1984, I was in Mexico City for an international health congress and called Don Hector again. Under his direction, I went through a second initiation at Teotihuacan and at Machu Picchu, even more amazing than the first. The sheikh who supported the Zawiya Habibia community in Meknes, Morocco, died several years later. After 17 years away, I returned to Meknes to pay my respects to the sheikh's tomb in a corner of the Zawiya. The blind man was still there, now the caretaker of the tomb, and recognized me by smell nearly 2 decades after we'd first met, before I could reintroduce myself. He helped put me in touch with a secret religious order dating back to Richard the Lionhearted and the Middle Ages. Mr. Idries Shah and I parted company without any plans to meet again, except that he promised to check up on me in 7 years. I had already been touring the world, giving workshops and receiving international awards for the humanitarian agencies I founded, when one day I received a letter postmarked from England. It had been 7 years to the day after I left Langton House. Shaw was sending me Sufi stories to analyze and report on again, just as he had at the beginning of my initiation. I met with Jonah on my second trip to Israel 7 years later. This time I went with my mother, and together we went back to that alley in Nazareth where I had seen the white-robed figure. The woman who had ordered me away remembered me from 7 years before, and this time welcomed me and my mother into her home. She also took us to some caverns beneath her home and showed us a secret she and her family had kept for nearly 2,000 years. The workshop I developed while at Lake Puyehu became the basis of workshops and lectures I gave mostly in Chile, Colombia, Venezuela, Uruguay, Argentina, India, and Spain. For over 7 years, I traveled between these 7 countries, teaching 40 weeks out of the year. I also completed several more books, started study groups, worked with police, governments, orphanages, and artists on bringing more soul awareness into their work, and taught medical students the importance and the intricacies of the doctor-patient relationship. I developed a network of programs that extended to 7 countries, called A Drop of Honey. When a disaster occurred, there was often an outpouring of generosity toward the victims, but there was generally no agency in place to get the right supplies to the people who needed them. The volunteers in A Drop of Honey found ways to get these material goods to orphanages, nursing homes, hospitals, and prisons by accepting donations from individuals and businesses and trading our surplus for other supplies that were needed. But our work did not stop there. When we arrived at these places, we did more than just drop off supplies. So often victims of circumstance become attached to what has happened to them. They identify with the events of their small story and cannot see themselves in any other way. Through interaction with these individuals, we activated their soul knowledge and allowed them to gain a new perspective on themselves. They stopped identifying with their current position and its third-dimensional expression. We were able to reach people we would not have otherwise had contact with and help them align with their soul identity. I remember a particular boy who said to me, "I am a spiritual human being, not an orphan. One day I will have a family, but today and every day I have God with me. He will guide me and protect me." This program was an example of responsible living. we were able to apply our words of intent and see them manifest. We may have been but a pebble of love dropped in a lake of suffering, but we caused a ripple effect to happen, a shift of light. Each drop of honey facilitated a pearl of light that imploded and detonated into soul awareness, producing the growth of self-confidence, self-love, and service to others. The moments in your life are leading you on a journey. Your life is not made up of random events with no connection to each other. You are on a path, and even if you currently find the path unfulfilling because it was dictated by your family or by cultural messages before you were aware of other choices, you must know that ultimately it is your essence that determines where your path leads. When I teach people how to discover the meaning in their lives, how to find out why they came into existence at this time and place, I try to show the difference between what I call the small story and the big story. The small story is what too many people think of as their lives. It includes personal likes and dislikes, jobs, possessions, vacations, births, deaths, and even the lucky and unlucky events of one's life. The small story is the tale told by your ego, the part of you that identifies with your physical body, your name, your age, your citizenship, your profession, your personality. We often invest more of ourselves in the small story because its subjects, other people and things, are finite objects we can examine and observe again and again. They are measurable, factual, and make us feel secure. The small story is that part of existence which is rooted in the third dimension, including the events that happen each day. The small story is an illusion. It is impermanent and limited. It creates artificial boundaries through perception of the material world. Because it is based on appearance more than anything, it is the source of self-deception. It is also the source of suffering. When we identify with who and what we are in third-dimensional reality, we separate ourselves from the soul. Sometimes, we as humans search for some sense of purpose or connection through fantasies and intrigues. If the meaning or direction of our life seems missing, we tend to create a mental framework on which the events and actions of our lives fit. But in the small story, events or thoughts occur that don't seem to fit the original framework we created. We are forced to ignore the piece of the puzzle that doesn't fit, or start building a new picture of ourselves and our lives into which it will fit. Either way, this is no casual undertaking. The ego sees the crises involving these pieces that don't fit, sometimes called cognitive dissonance, as a sort of death, the death of the old personality or life concept. Because the ego sees them as threatening, we tend to opt for ignoring the pieces that don't fit. The big story is completely different from this small story. It's the tale told by your soul. Many people find it difficult to trust in the big story because each person must verify their own role within it. There is no one else to point the way for us, to tell us what our purpose is. Without this personal verification, people are uncomfortable and inexperienced with their soul and have little idea how to progress. The clues to the meaning of their big story seem vague or ambiguous. In Western culture, we depend too heavily on our five senses because they aid in survival. By doing so, we neglect our intuition, the sense that leads us toward fulfillment, joy, and completion in our lives. Each of us has a divine mission or function. Each of us has a role to play in the big story, our natural role, the one we were born for. It is our part in the unity of consciousness, in all beingness. But we can only discover what our mission is by embracing the I am, by reconnecting with our souls. The small story allows only glimpses of the divine presence through physical experience. When we embrace the big story, when we follow our sacred paths, every moment is filled with the full radiant expression of the divine. The antidote for the suffering we encounter in the small story is forgiveness, love, compassion, and grace to ourselves and others. I learned this through Otis, through the Assailant Institute, through my many teachers. But the important thing to remember is that the technique employed does not matter as much as the attention to the soul. The different techniques I explore in this book are ways to move from third-dimensional reality to true reality based on the sacred, but they are not the only ways. The focus must never be on the process, but instead must be concentrated on unlocking the mystery that exists in each of us. This book does not cover the entire small story of my life, nor is my story finished. I have continued to live my small story, and I have continued to learn about the big story we all share. There are many amazing events and meetings that made my life's purpose clearer. Working for social issues worldwide and establishing the World Health Foundation for Development and Peace, finding my soulmate, the death of my parents, and birth of my children, encounters with higher beings, working as a therapist with multiple situations, and learning about other dimensional beings who are influencing earthly lives, meeting world political and religious leaders, including Jimmy Carter, Mikhail Gorbachev, Pope John Paul II, and the Dalai Lama, playing a role in the expansion of peace on our planet, and coincidences and introductions to people in all areas of public life. I was present in Jerusalem as peace began creeping into the Middle East, with the first historic meeting of Golda Meir and Anwar Sadat, the nations of Israel and Egypt. I was invited to Jimmy Carter's inauguration and felt the energy of his role in establishing lasting peace between these countries. I was present in Poland and the Soviet Union as these two countries that had known decades of oppression struggled to be free. I have seen things I never could have imagined. I've gone through secret initiations in Egypt and India, journeyed to secret sites in Peru and Bolivia, received ancient messages on Mount Shasta, come in contact with the White Brotherhood and the guidance of angels, participated in sacred retreats in the desert, treated alien abductees in therapy, been a consultant for the White House Institute of Peace, and mediated as part of Central American conflict resolution. But these events and the insights revealed will have to wait for my next book. The big story behind the events of this book showed me the commonalities of man's religions. The ideology and the forms of the rituals may change, but the essence is the same, and that is the soul. Sickness has an open door when an individual or society loses awareness of his or her essential essence. The soul is the key to the functioning of the entire human system. Even if the body has been decayed or been damaged to such an extent that it cannot be repaired, the soul can still heal, reconnecting the individual to his own essence, which is where true healing lies. Disease and social chaos present themselves as opportunities for transformation once an individual returns to his essence. The soul has a wisdom that at times we cannot fathom with our conscious minds, and yet its wisdom is somehow known to us. We are meant to keep growing well into adulthood through the expansion and realization of our essential selves and service to others, and knowledge of oneself is the surest route to this personal evolution. We live in a time of great change, a time of political and social paradigm shift. We live in a critical period of human history. The outcome of our thoughts and actions will determine the fate of life on our planet. As more and more people experience their own personal evolution, the planet is entering a time of spiritual sovereignty. Not only will we acknowledge and follow our individual soul, we will move to a state where we acknowledge that our soul is a global soul, that it is a galactic soul, that it extends and connects us to all other life in our universe. We are not just citizens of our community, we are citizens of our universe. This unity of soul will allow us to turn and face the radiance of the sacred. We will go beyond human potential and attain our divine potential. When we realize this, we can fulfill our true purpose and fulfill the destiny of our planet. We will become the true custodians of our world, and not barbarian invaders that need to destroy all that they see. The world will awaken to the power of love and will realize that love is truly the path to all understanding. This is what each of us as individuals needs, and it is what the planet as a whole must have to survive. This book is part one of the story of my spiritual adventure. It is the story of a man who pursued his essence in order to find the path he was destined to travel. As Otis helped me to reconnect with my guardian angel, I hope in some small measure I have helped you reconnect with the spirit and with your own essence. Humankind is rising to a new level of freedom. We are entering a time of angelic ethics when individuals will not rely solely on themselves, but will seek and receive the guidance of angels and other higher beings. I hope my journey will act as an invitation to you. It will open you to the existence we share and be an example of the possibilities that await us all. Traditionally, each individual in a culture was responsible for his own soul. The shaman could help to heal the individual. He helped men and women find their way back to their essence. But his real responsibility was for the soul of the community. It was his vocation to establish a relationship between the soul of each individual and the community, and to establish a connection between the community and the entire planet. I have pursued this role with my life and will continue to pursue it until we live in a world where the sacred has been recovered and we all share the blessing of soul awareness and a completely spiritual culture on earth.